Punxsutawney Phil, Jimmy the Groundhog, even the polar bear and skunk that predicted 6 more weeks of winter last February 2nd may need a new job. A UW-Milwaukee professor has a fascinating model to predict the arrival of spring. One of our own meteorologists, Michael Schlesinger, explains why springcasting is growing in popularity.
One of the ways we get through the winters here is by thinking about what's coming in the springtime.
I have a feeling we all can relate to the way Professor Mark Schwartz thinks, especially during these waning days of winter. This University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee climatologist specializes in springtime and when it's really going to arrive. We know, according to the calendar, it's around March 21st, but he's come up with a forecasting model using long-term temperature data.
This is only going to be as accurate as the long-term temperature forecasts are, so we're not, in effect, coming up with some, wonderful new thing that's going to improve the actual science, but what we're doing is translating it into something that's perhaps easier for people to relate to, that they can say, oh yeah, I know what that is, and so that's the idea. The lawns are greening up, and your first kind of shrubs are putting out leaves, and then when the lilac blooms, that's about 3 weeks later, then that's the time when a lot of the native trees are budding out. So it's a couple of nice stages, and the idea of this is that rather than just have a kind of an arbitrary sense of what's going on, or talking about arbitrarily it's going to be warmer, this gives people something a little bit more tangible that they can relate to.
Schwartz's model is also based on seasonal timing of plant life cycles, called phenology. A change in when plants emerge from winter dormancy is an example of a phenological climate change indicator.
Our typical time here is about April 10th. The forecast was suggesting it might be a week or so late, so maybe more towards the third week of April for the start here, if that holds.
Start of spring?
The start of this idea of the lawns greening up and the shrubs coming out.
So, according to the scientist, our real spring should arrive by mid-April, if not a little later. This is crucial information for those dependent on the start of the growing season.
If we're able to successfully provide some guidance for the start of the growing season, that people in the agricultural sector can do some of their planning activities more successfully. It's a little bit frightening, of course, to put a forecast out there, because if it's bad, it's like, well, we're going to say, well, okay, but you know how that goes. People remember bad forecasts probably much better than good forecasts.
This professor admits there's more he wants to do with his creation, like predict when fall will really get here, but he contends it's much more of a challenge.
It's turned out to be a much more problematic season to work with. It's a lot more difficult. There isn't really a standard way, like with any kind of model using air temperatures, you can get pretty good power at predicting growth in the springtime, but the fall colors and other things are much more difficult to predict in a consistent way across the country.
Schwartz has a warning for us all. He says don't get too reliant on all forecasts, even his. He says put a little intuition and personal experience into the equation, no matter how far we've advanced technologically.
There's still a lot of variability. For example, 2012, 2017 were early, but 2014, 2015 were rather later, and there was several weeks variation. So it's still a bit of a gamble, as I'll say. Well, it depends on how you feel. On average, there'll be more warmer years, but you're still going to have to pay attention each year.